Well, thank you so much, Shafak, for the introduction. Just as Shafak said, to start the conversation, Christina has an impressive and remarkable career in the intersection of technology, business, and sustainability. From her early days, actually in DC, as an analyst at the CIA, and go to Booz Allen Hamilton, to Palladium in New York, and then now currently at IBM as the global head of sustainability software. And in this capacity, you have been kind of spearheading the IBM's efforts in offering sustainability solutions to clients that are often powered by AI technology, blockchains, or Internet of Things. So to get this started, I would like to ask you kind of when and how did you start your career in the broad umbrella of technology and sustainability? Can you share a bit about your career path to inspire kind of the students here?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be here. I don't have a very linear path, and I think that's actually been really helpful as part of my experience. And also people are always like, how did you know what you wanted to do? And I say I never knew what I wanted to do. For me, it was really always driven by some sort of mission or impact. I wanted to make sure that what I was doing was greater than myself. And so I had some experience, as you mentioned, with different consulting companies. I worked at Bain and Booz Allen and PwC in cities around the world. That's especially at Booz Allen was when I got more exposure to the intersection of strategy, business strategy, technology, and impact. And technology still, even though I'm working at a tech company, as an enabler to facilitating and accelerating impact, not so much the impact in of itself, right? So that was always where I kind of started gravitating towards. And then when I was brought into IBM, it was fascinating because the person who brought me in said, I have this portfolio of software companies. I don't know really what to do with them, but I think there's this thread around sustainability, and I need somebody who has a strategy background, who can lead the strategy team, but also help me kind of understand and unpack how to think about sustainability as it relates to our software. And so I joined 2.5 years ago, and basically created with him the brand around sustainability software. It was really fascinating because a lot of the products, I mean, I joke it's like the non-sexy things, but it's things like how do you better manage your factories? How do you better manage your buildings, your commercial real estate? How do you think about traceability and transparency in your supply chain? How do you think about climate risk and what that means for your business and operations, right? And so I saw that there was a lot of potential to address real sustainability and climate issues that we're facing today with the technology at hand. And it's just a matter of kind of like unpacking, right? The technology exists. How do you unpack it to really further certain use cases that are real and impacting enterprises, right? We only do B2B, so we don't do any B2C. It's all how enterprises and organizations are dealing with these issues. And so I did that for a year, and then I was asked to take over for the entire brand a 1.5 years ago. So I've been doing that since then, and it's been quite a journey because the landscape, as you all know, it's changing so quickly, and technology also has to kind of change quickly with it, right? And so what the products can do, but also what the landscape looks like, and finding that intersection has been it's been really, really fun.
Thank you very much for sharing kind of your career path with all of us. So now let me kind of dive a bit deeper on your current role, which you also kind of mentioned a little bit.
Sure.
But kind of if you don't mind kind of sharing kind of the specific responsibility you have, just as you say, kind of sustainability and technology both are very broad. If you can kind of tell us kind of the primary responsibility that you have, what a typical day you typically have, and what type of people do you actually interact in a daily basis to do your job, so that our students can know when they embark their own career what the job
sure. Like. I'm sure you hear this from a lot of people. There's not necessarily one typical day. Every day is quite different. So my job, as I mentioned, I manage this portfolio of software products. It's a multi-billion-dollar business. We only sell those products to different companies or organizations. So it's not something that like you as an individual user would buy a license to, or right. So it's not like ChatGPT where you're using it yourselves or Microsoft Office or anything like that. It ranges, so the products range from, let's say, like inventory management for retail companies, right? Like the Adidas and the Saks Fifth Avenues and like the big ones. When you're going shopping on Black Friday or Cyber Monday, like these are the systems that are making sure that your orders go through and transact and actually getting you your orders. Climate risk I mentioned. So we used to own the weather company, which was not something I knew before I joined IBM, but IBM used to own the weather company. It's so random. And so we still have a very strong partnership with them. We have access to their weather API and weather data. And we use a lot of that in conjunction with other partners to build like climate models, right? We have a partnership with NASA that we announced last spring, where we're building foundation models, geospatial foundation models. So everyone talks about like large language models, but there are all other ways that you can do generative AI that's not just language models, like geospatial or time series or other types of models as well. And so we're doing that also to support different use cases around climate risk and resilience and mitigation and adaptation. A really good example of that is, for those of you who might have heard or are from like California and Florida, a lot of insurance companies, like the major ones, have pulled out because they couldn't figure out how to provide affordable premiums for folks to actually have insurance coverage because of wildfire risk or flood risk. I mean, this is like real things that are affecting businesses and people, right? Like people's homes and whatnot too. So if we can figure out a way to take climate models and help them figure out how to price that into their business, I mean, that's huge. So things like that. The other example I always give is predictive health maintenance and monitoring of physical infrastructure. So let's say like factories and making sure that things are actually working to the most optimized way, increase productivity, or critical assets or infrastructure like bridges and tunnels. One of the customers that we work with was the largest tunnel in Denmark. And because we were able to implement the software with them, it actually saved them 100 years of construction costs, if you will, right? Once you kind of like measure it down. And what that equates to, in addition to increases in safety, decreased cost, as you can imagine, is also 750,000 tons of carbon emissions that was saved by not doing that. And so it's really incredible what technology can help us achieve on the sustainability side. And the biggest area is really around like managing data, right? So increasingly, if you haven't heard, there are regulations that are also coming out everywhere. So it's come out in the EU, it's called CSRD. There's been some back and forth with the SEC here in the US, but there were some climate laws that came out in California. And a lot of countries around the world, India, Brazil, I mean, like, you name it, they're starting to kind of come out with their own regulations as well. And what do these regulations require? They require companies to report on their carbon emissions and on their sustainability posture, and how do they think about this as it relates to the financial materiality of their business, right? And this is new. Like, companies have no idea how to do this, because while many have been thinking about this for a while, others haven't, and they don't know where to start, and there's data coming from all around the company in different systems, and they don't know how to make sense of it. So that's another area that we're focused on as well. I'll just mention one other thing as part of my job, is like, so I manage these products with different product managers, but you know, a lot of what I do is making sure that it's addressing the needs of our customers in the market, right? So it's like going out to events and talking to different people. It's meeting with different customers and understanding what their pain points are. And then really interesting is actually even supporting IBM Corporate. So I sit on the AI Ethics Board, and I also sit on the ESG Executive Steering Committee. And those are fascinating because it's also like, we use the phrase, you have to drink your own champagne. How do we also use our own technology to help us figure out what we need to do as a company, not just like selling it to other people. And that's been really fascinating too. I know we were like in the back, we were chatting about AI ethics and just how like pervasive that is, and how we think about all problems right now, not even just sustainability, but clearly it's relevant to sustainability as well. So really multifaceted. I love it. And it's just going to continue to, I think, be as dynamic, if not more.
That's very exciting. Actually, I was going to ask, like, how IBM integrate kind of AI or apply AI in the sustainability initiative.
Sure.
And I was planning to ask you giving some examples, but obviously it is so exciting, so that Christina had already actually shared quite a few of those examples. And I also read quite a bit about kind of Christina actually has written many articles, very exciting articles about IBM's initiative in sustainability and how actually IBM actually managed to help clients from various sectors kind of improve or kind of translate their sustainability ambitions into actions.
Correct.
Those are very, very inspiring stories.
Oh, that's great.
That you share. And also, like, I think through the conversation so far, it's obvious, or like all of us probably kind of can see the opportunities or benefits it can have when companies like IBM applying or developing AI solutions to help kind of achieve the collective goal of sustainability as a society. But at the same time, probably we can also envision there may be challenges or even risks when applying AI technology, specifically as what we talk about. I think ethic issues related to, for example, data privacy, especially when for any AI algorithm to work, we need to have a huge volume of data, and sometimes those algorithms actually collect very personal and identifiable data to, for example, behaviors of individual consumers. For example, if we want to manage their energy efficiency of this particular building, and everybody's movement is actually collected in those algorithms, so that can potentially create a huge issue regarding privacy. And then besides privacy, I think another very important issue is the bias potentially exists in those algorithms. And sometimes when we develop algorithms, myself in my research that I do, propose algorithm too, and sometimes you at the first instance kind of create biases, either because the data that you use to train the algorithm is biased, or the design of the algorithm itself is biased. And sometimes it's actually quite hard to detect before you actually deploy those algorithms. So how actually, IBM kind of navigate those risks? And I think a famous example is like Google, right? So before they deploy BART, and then they had this huge backup. I think if you paid attention to the stock market, I think their stock dropped almost 5-6% just because of that issue. So how IBM actually navigate and kind of manage those risks?
So for us, it's all about trust, right? Because again, we are an enterprise company, meaning we only sell to other enterprises. And if you're talking about a business, you don't want to be using data or training model on data that is just scraped from all corners of the internet, right? So for any company, they have to trust that the data and the models that are being built off that data are trustworthy. And we, especially within AI ethics, we focus on a few different, we call them like 5 different pillars, right? So one is explainability, one is fairness, one is robustness, transparency, and privacy, right? And those are the focal areas for how we make sure that we are really building models and using data in a way that is, I want to say, it's the most relevant for the customer and also the most fair to the users. Now, the challenge is, and why we have created a model called Watson X, that's kind of like our generative AI platform. And Watson X has 3 components to it. It's .ai, .data, and .governance. And I'm going to focus on .governance for a second because I think that's actually the most relevant to this part of the discussion, which is how do you make sure, again, that the data that you're using to create the models is the right data, right? So if there's a company, or even if it's like Georgetown Business School that wants to build a model or do something where they're creating outputs, the data that comes in, they don't want it to be coming from, like the subreddits of Reddit, right? I mean, you all know what I'm talking about. So like, you don't want that to be where these models are coming from. You don't want it to be coming from like 4chan or some of these like extreme websites or social media channels. You want it to be coming from, let's say, like law journals, medical journals, like reputable sites like that. And so .governance focuses on that. It really focuses on ensuring that you feel like there's trustworthy data that is in your data lake, so that you know how to make sure that you're trusting the outputs that are coming out. The other piece of this is just like governance within the company. So I mentioned I'm on the AI ethics board, and I think every company should have an AI ethics board, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's made up of people from across the company. So it's folks on our research department, folks from the business, across multiple business units. It's from people in corporate, legal, government affairs. I mean, like all functions and all areas. And the idea is, when folks come to us with questionable use cases, we make a determination, like, is this really ethical? Is it ethical to be using AI for the building of autonomous weapons? Is it ethical to be using AI for facial recognition and surveillance? Some of them, IBM has a very hard stance, like, we will not, I use facial surveillance, we will not do anything around that. If it's like even remotely close to it, we won't touch it. And some of them, it's like, it's hard because this is such a gray area, and it's not particularly black and white. And we also know that other companies may not have the same ethical stances that we do. So there's always this question and this tension between the business and ethics. And it's not always there, but it is sometimes there. But we make our recommendations based on what we think is the right ethical decision. And then the business goes ahead and, implements that. So I think that that's really important. Like, some of this is dialogue, and we don't know all the answers. Again, the space is evolving so quickly. But we were talking about bias and data around sustainability. It's like, for those of you who aren't aware, climate change actually is adversely affecting the global south, people of color, and women much more than any other population in the world. And we don't talk about that enough, right? And so even some of the things that we're doing, what are some of the unintended consequences of some of those use cases, and how do we make sure that we are staying on top of some of those implications? It's I think it's like, we do what we can, we put the guardrails in place, we have the right governance, we make sure we're trying to use the right data. And one of the other things I'll end on here is like liability. So we're actually offering liability to, we will take on liability if any of our models are used for inappropriate instances, which I think is also, like, companies need to stand up and have some sort of stance on this. Otherwise, it's kind of a free-for-all. So that's how I think about it.
Very interesting perspective. I think those are kind of so important, but so complex.
Important. Yes,
I think nobody really knows exactly what to do. So I think it's very kind of encouraging to see kind of IBM is taking this very, very seriously.
Yeah, because it is happening. I mean, like, all of these government discussions are happening all the time too, right? So our CEO was at the White House and at the Capitol, like, talking to folks, as well as a lot of other tech companies. It's real time. Like, everyone's kind of trying to figure out real time what to do here. What are the regulations that need to be put in place? How do we think about this? We are very, very huge proponents of open source and the open source community. That I think is really important. And we're also big proponents that you can't regulate the technology. You have to regulate the use cases, because we all know the technology is already there. So you can't regulate the tech. You have to regulate how it's being used. And there are other differing perspectives on this depending on which companies you're talking to, but that's part of why I'm excited to be at IBM, actually, because I feel like we actually have a really robust sense of self and what we think is ethical in this space.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of part of related to this. You also mentioned, like, climate issues can disproportionately impact the areas which are relatively less developed or relatively poorer areas or regions or countries. And even for AI as well, the accessibility to AI technology also very much concentrated in kind of developed countries, like wealthy countries or regions. So how do you see in general, as part of IBM's effort as well, like, how the AI application in sustainability can help adjust the inequality that I kind of summarized earlier, that can potentially benefit the people who are not as well represented or not well to do compared to most people that we actually have chance to interact with in the US.
So we have something called the Sustainability Accelerator, and it sits outside of the business units, but it takes our technology and applies it to use cases in primarily emerging economies or areas that have lower socioeconomic development. And the whole purpose is like, if you want to call it tech for good, but the idea is, how do we make sure that what we're doing is also supporting other communities that may not have access to it, or other entities that may not have the funds to buy the technology that we're providing. So that's like one piece of it. I think the other piece is we also, for those of you who don't know, I always rave about our research folks. Like IBM has this R&D arm that is just like amazing. They're the most brilliant people in the company by far. And there's a lot of our researchers also who focus their efforts on exactly this, like tech for justice, and what does this mean in terms of like how do we apply our technology in ways that are, you know, more, I don't know, better for humanity, better for like positive impact. So I think that there's a lot of different ways that the company is trying to make sure that this is equalized. But I will say too, you know, at the end of the day, the ramifications are felt from those different populations. But companies and governments are the ones that tend to be the biggest emitters, right? So if we can provide our technology to these large companies that are emitting or are having like air pollution or whatever it is as byproducts of what they do as part of their business, then the downstream effects will be lessened. So I think if you can think of it as kind of the life cycle of the problem, you go directly to where some of the problems are, but you also, it's kind of indirectly affecting it through the enterprises that are leveraging technology in order to decrease their carbon footprint.
I see. Yeah, very, very interesting and very inspiring as well to hear those effort and the stories behind it. And I think kind of speaking of the part of your responsibility probably is promoting those products to different clients, like to make a case that why they should adopt those AI-enabled sustainability software. So, and we all see kind of through this conversation and also you're learning about this, we all believe that I think applying AI in sustainability, if done properly, can present or can greatly speed up or advance our collective agenda in sustainability as a society. But at the same time, I can imagine there may be barriers as well for people to adopt it. So what are the major barriers that you see in practice, kind of, you know, when convincing clients to adopt those initiatives?
So AI, I think, is interesting. AI has actually been around for a long time. Maybe not generative AI, like ChatGPT really kind of thrust it out there into the limelight, but AI in general has been around for a while. Like, you know, talk to text on your phone is AI, right? So like, it's been around for a long time. So I think like the adoption of it has actually been going on for a while. It's more a matter of how quickly can customers or different organizations adapt to how quickly the technology is evolving and what that means for their organizations. And AI and sustainability and the intersection, I think of in a couple of different ways, right? So one is, how can, to your point, how can AI help to support solving the problem faster? Meaning, like, how do you accelerate towards the outcomes that you're trying to achieve faster leveraging AI? I mentioned data before, like all of these regulations that are coming out and how companies need to figure out like all the things that are going on in their companies. We're talking about like hundreds of different systems, right? Like their HR system or ERP system, like all of these different systems that have all the different data that they need to pull into one place to really understand what's happening. That you can imagine the power of AI in making sense of all of that data, right? I mean, that's like really the power of it. And especially for those that are not super technical, myself included, having ways to understand and make sense of that through more like colloquial language, also important. And then getting to like the 80-20 so that you know exactly where to take the action. I love that you mentioned like turning sustainability ambition into action. That's kind of our mantra. It's like, how do you make sure that you're actually doing something about it? You don't just see what's going on, but you're actually taking action into what's happening in your buildings or your HVACs or your data centers or whatever it is. Like, that's where AI is super powerful. But the flip side is, yes, it has to be done correctly. And, you know, with the investments now that organizations are making in generative AI, there's increased use in energy and in water because the models are so powerful. And so, you know, there are ways to diminish that. Like our research folks are looking into different models that are much smaller, that are much more cost effective. We use the analogy, like it's like using, if the problem that you have is a nut, it's like using a sledgehammer to like hit the nut. Like it's so unnecessary to have this huge bloated tool to solve this small problem. And that's actually the same thing with AI. It's like, if you have a targeted problem that you're trying to solve, you don't need a sledgehammer. You don't need this huge bloated model. You can use a much more targeted model that's like going to save you on cost, but also be much more energy efficient in how you are, how you're going about and solving those problems. And so the location of your processing, how big your model is, the infrastructure that you're using, right? Like some data centers are using really old models versus newer models, and the newer models are much more efficient. So there are lots of different ways that you can make sure that you're keeping on top of the sustainability elements of the AI and the AI models themselves, in addition to the fact that AI itself is helping you solve the problem faster. So again, yes, done correctly, it's incredibly powerful. But that's what we're working with a lot of our customers and our partners on, is like, it's all a journey.
Right, absolutely. So I can also imagine in terms of kind of this adoption process, just as what you said, kind of technology has been around for a while. I think currently kind of what makes AI particularly exciting is the large volume of data, and also the infrastructure, the cloud infrastructure, so that people can deploy the technology much more easily. And also the technology itself becomes so much more powerful just because of the large volume of data and the speed by which the data becomes available.
Right.
However, those features may be true broadly to big companies, but for smaller companies, they may still be limited in terms of their data collection, a little bit, that kind of the level of digitalization. So they may not have tons of data to actually take advantage of those software, or they don't have kind of a huge infrastructure in place for them to actually even use or deploy those technology. So then that can generate kind of bigger gap kind of in the future in terms of different community, different company. So how does like IBM or broad community kind of help those smaller players actually take advantage of this kind of development or advancement in the future?
Yeah, so I would address that two ways. One is, I think that all companies, big and small, all have ways that they can leverage. Like, again, I use the sledgehammer example because you don't need to spend money to buy this huge model, right? And I'm not super technical, but I'll mention so one of the things that's really interesting with generative AI is this thing called foundation models, and why it's called that essentially is like you build this foundation and then you can do all of these things on top of it, right? Like that's the way, like very easy layman's way of me understanding it. And so you don't have to recreate these new models over and over again, retrain them, the data and all of this and that. You can actually like build it once and then solve a lot of different problems. That's really efficient, right? Rather than the old school way, which is like you kind of have to build new models and retrain it every time for a different problem. That's really powerful. And one of the things that does is actually democratize the availability or accessibility of Gen AI, because you don't have to pay for this like big, huge thing. You also don't necessarily have to do it all like in-house, right? So you mentioned cloud and the accessibility of everything happening in the cloud. So for a lot of small companies, they can just leverage all their infrastructure. It doesn't have to be something that they pay for. This is all, I think this is all like, it allows for a lot more of that equalized access. And I would also say, like, going back to the sledgehammer, not every company needs to do that right now. So if they're really, really small, they don't necessarily even need to, because the data that they have is still manageable with the technology that they already have. So they don't have to necessarily force the issue either. So I think across, depending on what the situation is, just like understanding that there are different options and making sure that they're, that depending on the size, depending on the context, that they're just looking at it from their purview, and what may work and what may not work, I think there's a lot of different ways that they can go about this.
Yeah. Thank you, Christina. That's very insightful and exciting to hear that AI can actually potentially reduce inequality. I think
we hope, right? That's what we're working towards, yes. There's still a long ways to go in general in the
that
field.
Makes a lot of sense, So to conclude this part of the conversation, of course, we will have Q&A, but before we kind of enter Q&A, I would like to ask, many of our audiences are students from different programs at Georgetown. All of you, I think, would be interested in a career potentially in technology and sustainability. So before they embark their own career, do you have any advice for our students here?
Yeah, one of the things I was I don't think she's here, but I was talking to Christy, who I think runs your career management center here for the business school. And one of the things I said to her was, everybody thinks about having to join a tech company to be at the intersection of tech and sustainability, and that's actually not true, right? So unfortunately, you all know there's been tons of layoffs in the tech industry in general over the last 18 months. But I think one of the good things that has come of that is that it democratizes or allows for other industries to also get access to a lot of the tech talent. And so I would say, like, there's so much need at the intersection of AI and sustainability in many other industries, manufacturing, healthcare, government. And so I think that there's a place for everybody who's interested in this topic, and you can approach it from so many different angles. You can approach it from the tech side if you're more technical, or you can approach it from the business side, or you can approach it from the environmental, like science side. And now I say this facetiously a little bit, but I joke but not joke that, like, I hope in 5 to 10 years there's no such thing as a chief sustainability officer, because it should just be kind of embedded as part of what everybody does, as part of their day-to-day in the business. And so, like, you all, as you embark on wherever you will be, like, should be part of that. Like, how do you embed technology and think about sustainability as part of everything that you do? We wrote 2 thought papers last year, one on design for sustainability and one on software engineering for sustainability. And there's just, like, basic concepts in there that's like, if you're doing design for products, like software products, or you're doing coding, like, these are some tips that you can think about incorporating in part of what you're doing day to day to make a difference. And I think people underestimate the impact that they can have. I mean, you take, like, let's say all the people here in this room and all the people here in this building, and you imagine, like, if you all are going out and doing whatever you're doing, but you're incorporating this as part of your day to day, no matter where you are, like, the impact of that at scale is huge. And I think we need to give ourselves more credit for being able to, think about and incorporate that as part of what we're doing as like within our careers and our journeys.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Christina. And now I'll open up the floor for more questions from our students. To take this opportunity to ask any questions you may have. Oh, yeah, please.
Your work on the ethics board, I was wondering if there were any examples of overlap. Oh, there we go. Overlap between ethics and sustainability issues that you see.
A lot, yeah.
How those are handled.
Yeah, some of the ones that we mentioned earlier. So they haven't necessarily come up on the ethics board, but as part of our ethics discussions and as part of what we make sure we want to keep in mind. So some of it is around, like, some of the challenges of AI and what the ramifications or unintended consequences might be for particular populations. And that is very much tied to sustainability, because it's like, if we're doing XYZ type of work with particular companies and there's, like, increased air pollution or water pollution or waste, like, who is that affecting? It's usually affecting downstream communities, the people of color, poor communities that are living in certain areas. So we talk about it in that capacity. Also, as it relates to increased energy usage or water usage, like, how do we think about that? And that's part of what I mentioned earlier. Like, there are different ways to address that, and that's part of what we're doing. So it comes up as part of discussions. It hasn't necessarily come up yet while I've been part of the board as, like, a specific use case, but it's more just part of, like, the everyday discourse, if you will. Yeah, sure.
All right, folks, don't be shy with questions. We've got mics runners around to bring you mics. And if you could introduce your name and what program you're with when you start.
Hui Jackson, I'm a Flex MBA student. I have a question about the super AI of super AI. So right now we build lots of data centers. We know we can build a data center for 6 months, but you can never get the energy ready in 6 months. And we hear there'll be more. So I guess I try to understand if IBM is looking for more innovative solution to address these issues.
So yes, I actually don't know the details, though, to be fair. I think that's a lot of what our R&D, our research department is focused on, and I would have to get back to you on details around what exactly those programs look like. Yeah.
Hi, how's it going? My name is Harsh Patel. I'm part of the ESM program, former IBMer.
Yeah, so I know that there's a lot of European talent that is in the company that's been working on these issues for, like a decade now. How is IBM currently leveraging that to take their talents and kind of apply it to a global approach to sustainability?
Can you repeat? So you're talking
Sure.
about what kind of talent specifically?
So European-based IBMers have been having to deal with sustainability data issues for longer than us in the States.
Got it.
So how are you leveraging them to kind of spread the knowledge and information across the board?
It's a great question. There's so much regional or localized focus on this area. So the EU is so much further ahead, and it's not as politicized as it is here in the US, unfortunately. And so there's a ton of our European colleagues who will come here and share their information with us. I mean, we do a lot of webinars and stuff with them too, but it's also, as much as we can take from them, it's also like got to be localized to here, right? Or to anywhere else. So like, even if I talk about how companies are on the journey and they're everywhere on the spectrum from super immature to much more mature, it's the same with countries or regions around the world. And so even though they're more mature, like they still don't really have great handles on their data either, to be honest with you. You probably know that. So it's not like this problem is solved in the EU and now we just have to learn from there. The CSRD did not come out like that long ago. So in terms of mandates, right, even though they might have been further ahead in how they're thinking about these issues and incorporating them as part of their business ops, the mandates and the regulations have not necessarily been around for 10 years. And so everyone's a little bit struggling with it. And so while we can absolutely take what they're doing and try to apply, we want to also make sure that what we do for a company here makes sense for a company here, Yeah.
I have one over here. Hi, my name is Connie, second year MBA student here. Thank you so much for being here. I wanted to get your thoughts on the competitive landscape for sustainability reporting software. It seems like a spring of startups and large companies trying to move in.
Yes.
So how do you think about competitive advantage and the kind of customers you try to serve?
Yeah, yes, you hit it spot on. I mean, it feels like everyone and their mom is coming out with some sort of reporting software these days. I will say, so full transparency, we tried to build our own reporting software, and our head of product at the time was like, this is crazy. It doesn't make any sense for us to do it ourselves. We should just buy one. And so we were going through our own RFP process as IBM corporate to figure out which reporting technology we wanted to use and incorporate. And so one of the ones that we decided to go with, we ended up buying instead. We bought it because they've been in the space for 14 years. They're way ahead of what we could have put together in 6 or 12 months. I will say that to your second point around competitive differentiation, while there is a lot of flashiness out there, a lot of companies, especially the larger enterprises that are our customers, they either don't trust the flash, meaning like they don't necessarily trust that a startup is still going to be around in 6 or 12 or 18 months, and they know that this is a long-term partnership that's needed, so they want to go with like a more, I guess, like a stable or reputable brand. And or they have fallen in with the flash and they come to us 6 or 12 months later and they're like, we made a really big mistake. And we actually know a lot of these, like confidentially, that some of them, even though it's not in the open and they're still marketing themselves, we know that they're out for sale because they come to us asking us to buy them. So it's such a heated and competitive market that I think that fragmentation can only get better. It's not going to get worse. And I think that a lot of that will be consolidation in the market, and or we're already seeing entities that have fallen away. And so, it's a really hard market right now for sure compared to some of the others. Like when we do like physical asset management, that's like you need real big, dollars and capital to get into that versus something like this where it takes a lot less capital or upfront investment. So it's a long game, but we're in it for the long game. So hopefully that'll pan out. Yeah.
Hey.
Hi.
First of all, thank you for the talk. My name is Ghassan. I'm a junior in the MSB. I'm actually taking Professor Yujal's class on sustainable business models. So my question is the following. We talked a lot in class about the importance of tracking the impact of a product after it's being implemented. So I wanted to ask if there's anything that's being done to, with customers to measure the actual impact on their businesses after implementing the product.
Yeah, great question. I mean, do you want to answer the question too? So before we launch a product for general availability to the public, we usually have very close working relationships with like a handful of our customers to make sure that it actually works for them and that there's tangible metrics in place that help them solve the problem. So whatever the problem is. So to your point, if we just like launched any products, like we wouldn't necessarily know exactly what's going on, but we make sure that we work with that handful to understand all the implications and the metrics for success beforehand. And then once it's available, we also do very regular cadences with all of our customers, be it surveys or interviews or user groups or whatever it is. And our users are very vocal. So they will tell us when things are not working. And they will also tell us when they love something. They're, like the NPS scores in general are very, like they're very to a T, because these are their businesses. So they have no problem telling us like one way or the other what's going on. So we have to constantly keep a pulse on the impact that our products are having, both from a business perspective as well as like how it's affecting our customers and their business perspective. So we hear it across the whole value chain, if you will. Yeah.
Christina, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Thomas Phillip. I'm a second year MBA student. So my question is, you spoke a lot about AI being used for climate change and sustainability predictions. I wanted to understand what efforts are there in the healthcare space and how you're using the reporting platform and other platforms that you have to both gather this information, understand what the impacts are in the healthcare space, and then given the big name that IBM has around the world, how you're using that to drive policy change as well, if there's any.
Interesting. So one, something like reporting is industry agnostic. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, whether or not you're financial services, manufacturing, healthcare, tech, it affects all big companies, right? So everybody has to do the reporting. So the reporting software can be used anywhere. It's not necessarily, right, industry specific. So that's one piece. Two, as it relates to how the technology can be used. So, I mean, healthcare is interesting because you talk about like the entire system. I mean, so I don't know what you mean by healthcare, but everything from like pharmaceuticals to providers and insurance companies. So it really depends on which part of that spectrum you're talking about. But any one of the software that we sell, like it's all relevant to the healthcare industry as well, right? Because they still have to manage let's say their hospitals, or they have to manage their insurance premiums. They still have to manage how they think about their operations, because it's still a business. I think from a policy perspective, we don't touch that, right? That's not, we have a government and regulatory affairs group within IBM corporate, but that's not necessarily talking about specific industries and how we're affecting change in particular industries around policy. It's more about like, the AI one that I mentioned, where we make sure that we're showing up on Capitol Hill to voice how we think about like the technology at large and what that means for the broader society. Like in that way, we'll leverage what we're doing, but not necessarily for any other industry specifically.
And this will be the last question. Very likely, thank you. My name's Jay. I come from an MBA class. Personally, I have first-hand experiences dealing with like ESG discussion when working in my past industry, which was manufacturing equipment company for the manufacturer firms. So we are facing this issue that we are reluctant to provide some confidential information to help them to fulfill their disclosing on the ESG report. So what we're seeing was eventually those better vertical integrated company have their larger advantage to disclose more and more data in their report. Are you seeing the same trend in the greater industry? And how do you think the smaller firms should overcome this? Because the collaborations with other supplier might have constraint on the data providing.
Can I, before you take the mic away, can I just clarify, when you say you're having trouble, you meant like with their scope 3, like understanding their supply chain or understanding what's happening within their walls?
Yeah, like for me, I'm a standpoint as equipment provider. We're reluctant to provide those information to those manufacturings because we feel like that was confidential. But they have a greater purpose to disclose that, but we also have the concerns.
Yes, okay, thanks for the clarification. yes and no, right? Yes, it's not something that a lot of companies want to be talking about or providing information for. However, I think increasingly recognizing that they have to because regulations are requiring them to, trying to figure out the best way to go about doing that. So if there is a platform or there's some technological innovation or there's some sort of like blockchain technology that allows them to do it in a way where it's secure, then they don't necessarily have to worry about like manual intervention or people seeing that data. They can just get an aggregated view and then make decisions or action points or report based on that, right? And that's part of the, I think, allure of technology in this space, because then like Joe Schmo or Jane Doe, like they don't have to worry about like this is going to be in a spreadsheet and everyone's going to see all of this information and it's not something that makes my company necessarily look good. The flip side is also like these companies also have to understand that part of why these regulations are in place is so that there is additional accountability in what they're doing, right? So hopefully it starts to actually, that's what the action piece, right? Hopefully it actually starts to encourage companies to understand what's going on within their walls and then make actions towards that so that they're not necessarily trying to hide that information from others. So I think it's like multifaceted, but I do think technology helps with that, right? Because if it was like the secure piece, the transparent in terms of outcome, but not necessarily all the data, like these are all things that would help so that there's less hesitancy in talking through and sharing that. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Christina.
Yeah.